Today we're going to do a tournament review of the tournament I organized last weekend at one of our local game stores. Before we start, I just want to say a big thank you to the store for hosting us and to all the players for showing up. The tournament was 2 rounds. It was 1,500 points per game, and we had 4 players, including myself, show up. So a small tournament, but we still had a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoy seeing some of the pictures of the games that I took. I did cover my army list in a separate video, so make sure you check out that video if you're curious. We are going to start by reviewing the games, and I'll talk a little bit about the logistics of the tournament afterwards, if you're curious about how it went and how I organized it, just as a guide for maybe how you might want to do things for your own tournament in the future. Game 1 was Solar Auxilia against Solar Auxilia. This was against my usual opponent, Jeff, who, if you followed the channel for a little while, you know he normally plays Alpha Legion. But today, he's starting a new army, and he decided to give it a try. He's playing Solar Auxilia. It was interesting and very, I think, instructive to be able to play against the army that I usually play myself. I took my normal Solar Auxilia force. But it was just fun to have a different style of opponent, or a different style of army. And you can see here our deployment. And I'm going to take you through at least what I did, just starting from left to right. We had some Velatari deploy in the infiltrate part of deployment, in the woods there. And that was kind of an alteration from my plan, because I had intended to place them in the center to occupy that objective. But those Velatari on the left flank there were too much of a threat, so I had to place my own to counter it. I have some infantry backing them up, and then some Vanquisher Leman Russ, some Tarantula anti-air batteries, another detachment of infantry, some Valdor tank hunters, Baneblades, my other detachment of Velatari and Ogrons, another detachment of infantry, and then another detachment of Leman Russ Vanquishers. And then in the middle, occupying that objective, we have a strong las rifle section in my Pioneer Company, along with the quad launchers occupying that central objective. I believe this was the No Man's Land mission. And my initial plan was, just like I talked about in my army video, I have 2 retain groups, and then a seize group, and then an Occupy combat group. And as you might imagine, the Occupy combat group has infiltrated in the Pioneer Company to take that sector objective. And I have a retain group on the left flank, and then on the right flank I have my seize group. And the seize group is intended to push forward and take that objective, which you can see Jeff has deployed his laser destroyers in their rapier batteries in the woods there. So that was my initial plan. Let's see how that worked out. So this is the end of turn 1 movement phase. And you can see I've pretty much pushed up across the whole front of the battlefield. Just again, starting from left to right, I charged in with my Velatari. I was lucky enough to get initiative, so I was able to get the charge off, and that was a pretty decisive factor in this game, I think. The infantry moved up in support behind them. My Vanquishers pretty much retreated into the trees in the center, just to cover that movement corridor between the church and the other buildings. The Valdor moved up to try to cover that other corridor on the east side of the church. And then the Baneblades and the Vanquishers on the right also moved up. And I just garrisoned my infantry in the buildings, and I just marched my Velatari and Ogrons up on the right flank to take that objective, really putting them under the guns of some laser destroyers and the Ethon Heavy Sentinels that Jeff marched up into those trees there. One of the big mistakes I made in this game was using my aircraft improperly. And I'm really kind of upset about it, because I said in my army list video that I was going to be very restrained with them. I had specific purpose for each of those aircraft in mind. The Lightning was supposed to be my primary anti-air, and it's like a secondary gunship in my backline. And then the Avenger Strike Fighter was supposed to be my backline protection. Now, Jeff didn't have any aircraft, didn't really have any dedicated anti-air either, so I got overconfident, I got cocky, and I pushed them up the table to try to get at Jeff's basilisks in the back line there. And as you'll see in the next image, that was a mistake. And sure enough, here we are in the end of turn 1 combat, and you can see that my Avenger Strike Fighter is nowhere to be seen. Jeff shot him down with the multi-lasers from the Ethon Sentinels, and that was just my fault. Completely careless play. I knew I shouldn't have done it, and I did it anyway. Just was really trying to get at those basilisks because they are just an oppressive presence on the battlefield. The rest of the results for this turn were also a little mixed. On the left, I was able to pretty much take out most of Jeff's Velatari, but those Ethon Heavy Sentinels moved up, as you can see on the left, towards the objective, and really were able to occupy it pretty solidly. My Vanquishers put some pretty effective fire on Jeff's super heavy armor, and those, I think, really carried the game for me. On the right side, as you can see, there were a lot of Ogrins and Velatari there, and now there is only one stand of Velatari alone, and I'm afraid, very afraid. He failed his morale check, and he's going to fall back at the end phase. I guess I did not take the photo at the very end of the turn. But you can see, these garrisoned... actually, you can't see... in the center, my Velatari were able to occupy the church, and Jeff's Velatari have assaulted the building, and there's going to be a strong fight over that structure for the rest of the game, really. So now we're on turn 2 movement, and you can see we've had some more interplay on the left flank. I advanced some of my infantry out of the structure they were garrisoning, and move them to challenge the Ethon Heavy Sentinels on the left for that objective. And then my other infantry section has pretty much stayed tucked into the woods there, ready to support if needed. Throughout most of the rest of the board I have advanced. The Vanquishers have moved up out of the trees, trying to get position to put some fire on Jeff's Basilisks eventually. The Bane Blades and so the Bane Blades advanced, but my Vanquishers on the right fell back because they were facing a wall of Ethon Heavy Sentinels and Laser Destroyer Rapiers in the trees, and I really didn't like those odds. So I fell them back into the trees, try to reposition them for later in the game. You can see I didn't learn my lesson. I pushed my Lightning Fighter up again on the left side there, probably trying to get another shot at Jeff's Basilisks. And here you can see the results of the combat phase for turn 2. I was able to take out another of Jeff's super heavy tanks. He knocked out one of my Bane Blades, as you can see on the center right there. Fight for the church is still ongoing, and on the left side there, it looks like, this is when I routed or made fall back Jeff's infantry and Ethon Heavy Sentinels that were occupying that left objective. So that one is pretty solidly in my hands at this point, and I've got that infantry section there to back the remainder of that, the advancing section. My Vanquishers are in pretty good position on the left there. On the right, again, they're trying to reposition through those trees, so it's a little bit slow. I think I misplayed that. I think I mispositioned them on deployment. They should have been farther to the left. Just they would have an easier time of getting into a better position as the game progressed. So this is turn 3 movement. And as you can see, I've pretty much got control of my half of the board. Moved my infantry up on the left, established a screen to protect the objective, and charged, it looks like, with 2 Velatari into that the structure just to the upper left of the church. My Vanquishers advanced. So we've left wrecks on the table, and because of that, I wasn't able to put any fire with the Vanquishers onto Jeff's Basilisks. So I do like that. I think it's not really according to Hoyle as far as the rules go, but I think it makes the battlefield a little bit more alive, and it just seems realistic that a giant super heavy tank would leave a pretty sizable obstruction on the battlefield. Now, there is something funny on the right. My Baneblade fell back because of the casualty it took. And on the right hand side, I moved my my Vanquishers back up to basically where they were in turn 2. So again, that's kind of a misplay on my part. I needed to get them there so they can get an angle on the storm hammer that was moving out from behind the trees there. And yeah, so I was able to take out a bunch of the sentinels and the rapier batteries, I think with the infantry that were in that building there just to the northeast of the destroyed Baneblade. And so again, that was a bad play on my part. I moved them back and then moved them forward again into basically the same position. So I really need to watch my activations and how I deploy and how I use my units. I do think it was the right call to move them back because I think they would have got smoked by those laser destroyers, but that's something I should have anticipated and not moved them forward in the first place and found a better position for them. This is the last bit of the game. This is the end of combat phase turn 3. And you can see I pretty much have control of the board at this point. Most of Jeff's heavy tanks are down. And my Vanquishers are in pretty good position to start moving up the board. He's still got 9 of them. That's still 9 AP minus 2 shots. But Jeff conceded at this point, and we called the game. So overall, I think it was a fun game, a really interesting game. It was nice to play against Solar Auxilia for a change and kind of see, different approach to army building than the one that I take. The key points of the game probably were the Velatari fight on the left flank and in the church. My las rifle section was able to hold on there for a long time, and that was really key because I was able to keep control of the center. So yeah, other than a few misplays, I think the game went well. Just something to watch out for when placing your key units, especially at low points levels like this where you really don't have that many key units and you really need to make the most of them. Of game 2 of our tournament, and this was against a opponent who is new to the channel. He was playing a combined Emperor's Children and Alpha Legion army. The Emperor's Children was a Skyhunter Phalanx force, which was a very flexible and interesting formation to face. Posed us a lot of challenges with all those outflanks. And you can see our deployment here. So just going from left to right, just like I did in the previous game, I instead focused on the left flank for my seizing force, just because it was more in the open. And I had a good opportunity with that center right objective to infiltrate my Pioneer Company and establish good control of it from the start of the game. In the center and the center left, I put my Baneblade and my Vanquisher detachment and established, I think, a pretty strong position also in the center with my Valdor, the Tarantula, and another las rifle section, backed up by my quad launchers. And so again, the idea here was I was going to push forward on the left and hold on the right and use my superior range, really, to control the field. Now, on the table here, you can see the orange and red cutouts. The red represents dangerous terrain, and the orange represents difficult terrain. So there was a pretty open space in the middle of the board, kind of that the choke point there and the trees that I was able to control. So this board did favor me just because of the just the range advantage that Solar Auxilia naturally has over Astartes. That said, there was a sizable amount of my opponent's force which was coming on from outflank or deep strike. which gave him a lot of tactical flexibility here. And I think that mitigated some of the advantage that I had due to the terrain. So this is where we were after movement on turn 1. You can see, again, I pushed forward pretty aggressively with the Velatari and the Ogrons on the left flank there. Infantry kind of shifted around on the back left, trying to get into good garrison positions, just to secure my left flank in case my opponent brought any of his outflanking units in close to my table edge. I was more restrained with my aircraft this time around. I brought on my Lightning and my Avenger just as more support, as I had intended them to be, than trying to push them up into the teeth of my opponent's guns. You can see in the center left there, between the dangerous and the difficult terrain, my Velatari are contesting the objective with some of my opponent's infantry and bikers. So that was a pretty stiff fight. The Baneblades and the Vanquishers are pushing forward to establish good firing lanes. And then on the right, that was kind of where I sensed my opponent's main push was going to be. So I sort of shifted my Vanquishers over into the trees to try to give them some cover. And I have a infantry detachment there, again, to provide some protection from any outflanking units that might be coming in there. You can see my poor Pioneer Company is pretty much surrounded there. My opponent has, moved his forces into the edge of the trees there, so they're able to fire in on my my Velatari and the infantry section. This is the position at the end of turn 1 combat. Not too decisive here, just a scattering exchange of fire. In the center, there's a little bit of combat. I think my opponent made good use of his point defense weapons, bringing his jet bikes in, strafing my infantry, taking quite a few of them out, and just positioning his forces to best effect. So this is the position at the end of turn 2 movement. You can see I've pushed my Ogrons forward to charge a remaining Leviathan Dreadnought on the left there. My opponent has moved his Spartans forward, dismounted his infantry, and in the center, my Velatari were able to charge my my opponent's infantry and bikers and pin them in place. I've moved some of my infantry around, got them garrisoned in buildings down there on the bottom left. The Baneblades kind of backed up a little bit, just ready to put fire into those Arcus that are facing them across that dangerous terrain. My Vanquishers have moved into the trees there, prepping to do the same thing, and the Valdor just shifted over some in order to accommodate the Vanquishers and allow them to join them in striking out of the Arcus. Right next to the Valdor, I'm sure you can see there's a detachment of Terminators that my opponent deep struck into the back line there. And that was a key moment, I think, in the game. I think he placed them well, really threatened my vehicles. Unfortunately, on Deep Strike, you cannot charge. So that, I think that limited the utility of the movement. And I was able to bring my Avenger Strike Fighter onto the table, and I was able to do, as you'll see, some very effective fire with it into those Terminators. The Vanquishers on the right kind of moved out to the left. It's hard to see in this image, but a detachment of Javelins kind of moved in from the edge of the table, and they were positioned pretty well to do some serious damage to them. But fortunately, I was able to get them out of the way in time, and my infantry were there to sort of provide some covering fire. In the center, the center right, you can see that my opponent was able to take out a big chunk of my Pioneer Company, but they're still holding that center right objective, which was key. And here are the results of combat for turn 2. You can see on the left, I was able to mop up most of the remainder of the infantry and secure that center left objective. And in the center, my Vanquishers and Valdors were able to put some very effective fire on my opponent's Arcus tanks And on the right, my infantry did some serious damage to his outflanking javelins. The Avenger did its job very well. I think there are 2, maybe 3 stands of Terminators left there. And at this point, my opponent decided to call the game. A really great game, very thought-provoking. It's definitely a challenge facing such a mutable army as the Alpha Legion and the Emperor's Children, with that Sky Phalanx being able to outflank and to choose to have initiative on a particular turn, I think is very powerful. And so that's the end of the games. We only did 2 rounds. So I really want to thank again my opponents for a really great series of games. And I'm looking forward to the next tournament. So that's it for the game reviews. I'm going to talk a little bit now about how I organized the tournament. So if you're interested in that, stick around. So as I think I said at the beginning of the video, it was a 1,500 point tournament, and we decided to do 2 rounds. Now, we made these decisions for 2 reasons. First of all, we're just getting our group together, and 1,500 points is enough where you can really get a feel for the game, but it's not too demanding for people to put a force together in a reasonable amount of time. So it's been 3 months since our last tournament, which was at 1,000 points, and so now we've bumped it up to 1,500 to give people a chance to build up their armies, get some practice games in, and really get a feel for how Legions Imperialis is on the table. We did 2 rounds because I think 3 rounds is too much. I went to the convention in Washington in June or July, and it was 5 games over 2 days, 3 games the first day, and that was very fatiguing. I don't want to sound, wet behind the ears, but it was a lot. And for a friendly local tournament, I think 2 rounds is probably the most you want to do. It lets people come in, have a good time, and then go home and still have a decent amount of time in their day to do whatever they need to do. 3 rounds, especially with a longer game like Legions Imperialis, you really, I think, is too much. So for a regular weekend tournament, I think 2 rounds is where you want to be. As far as timing goes, we limited it to 3 hours per round. I think 3 hours is very achievable, but you do need to be focused. I think even at 2,000, 2,500 points, 3 rounds is fine as long as your players are staying focused and are moving quickly. If you're stopping and chatting and socializing every other detachment that you move, it's going to take you a lot longer. And obviously we're here to have fun, we're here to socialize, and that's a big part of the game. But I would encourage you, if you're going to run a tournament, just to try to remind people that it's much more satisfying if the game reaches a real conclusion. That was one of the things that I really didn't like about the convention that I went to, was it ended up being a sort of a talk-through situation. And admittedly, many of the games, there was a result determined by the time the time had to be called. But I think it's just a lot better if you can get to a final result, a final solid result, 5 turns in the time limit. And so I would encourage you, if you're going to run a tournament, just to speak with your players and just make sure everybody's on the same page about staying focused and moving quickly, rather than having analysis paralysis, or just having too much socialization going on. I will say one of the things that helped me anyway is I used the time hacks from GW's tournament pack, which sort of breaks down how much time each player should have or should use for each of their turns. And I called those times out during the tournament. I tried not to be too obtrusive or objectionable about that, but I do think it helped just to keep me on track, give everybody a sense of where we should be in the tournament. Because again, we do want to play, we want to have a good time, but we also want to finish in a reasonable time and be able to go home and do whatever else we need to do on our weekends. So those are my takeaways from running this tournament. I think it was a lot of fun. I think it's a really good idea to be able to get your group together and show some presence in your local community, show that you are running events, that you are playing games. because if people don't see that, they're not going to be interested in getting into a game, and the game's not going to grow. So even if, like I had to do, you kind of have to make the terrain work. I had to use cardboard cutouts. It's not perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good, right? So I would encourage you to not wait, even if your models are not fully painted, even if your terrain is not perfect. Get your friends together, organize a tournament. If you don't like calling it a tournament, call it a melee. Just call it a narrative event, whatever it might be. But just get out there and have a couple of games together and take some pictures and make some memories. And I guarantee you won't regret it. So that's it for this video. Make sure you check out my army list video. Let me know what your thoughts are, maybe what I should take for the next tournament. And I'll see you in the next video.